Something just shifted in Israel. People don't see it yet. By the end of this video, you'll understand what just changed in Israel and why it matters far more than most people realize. Here's what happened. Israel didn't lose a war. Israel didn't win a war. But something far more important took place. Israel entered a new phase, and almost no one noticed. If you've been watching the news, you've seen the headlines. Ceasefire holds. Aid flows into Gaza. Negotiations continue. Calm language. Diplomatic handshakes. But here's what makes this moment different from others. And this will become critical when we reach discovery number 5. This isn't just a pause. Let me show you what actually shifted. Notice how many different parties are involved. This isn't bilateral. This is multilateral. And that distinction matters prophetically. But here's what's most significant. And this becomes absolutely essential when we examine the Daniel 9:27 connection. This created something Israel hasn't had in years. Temporary calm. Breathing room. And here's what Scripture teaches us. Temporary calm is never neutral in prophecy. It's always a transition, either toward genuine peace, which only comes with Messiah's return, or toward something far more dangerous. But here's what makes this particular calm so prophetically charged. To understand what just happened in Israel, we need to understand what Daniel prophesied nearly 2,600 years ago. Because Daniel 9:27 describes something very specific, and it doesn't start the way most people expect. And here's what makes this prophecy so directly relevant to current events. The specific language Daniel uses mirrors exactly what we're seeing unfold today. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. A covenant. With many. For 1 prophetic week. 7 years. And in the middle of that week, betrayal. Sacrifices stopped. Abomination established. Desolation poured out. This is the prophecy that launches the final 7 years of human history as we know it. But here's what most people miss. Daniel's prophecy doesn't begin with invasion. It doesn't begin with war. It doesn't begin with conquest. It begins with agreement. The Antichrist does not rise as a conqueror first. He rises as a peacemaker. He doesn't arrive with tanks and missiles. He arrives with solutions and guarantees. He doesn't threaten Israel. He reassures Israel. And a war-weary nation, exhausted from conflict, accepts his covenant gladly. But here's what's chilling about this pattern, and this connects directly to the fragility we'll examine in discovery number 4. The covenant works precisely because Israel is exhausted. The timing isn't random, it's strategic. This is the pattern Daniel establishes. Not war, then prophecy. Agreement, then prophecy. And he shall confirm the covenant with many. Many, not 2. Not Israel and 1 enemy. Many, plural, multiple parties. A multinational arrangement. This is exactly what we're seeing with the Gaza ceasefire framework. Look at who's involved. The United States as primary broker and guarantor. Egypt as regional mediator and border monitor. Qatar as intermediary with Hamas. The United Nations providing endorsement and legitimacy. Various Arab states supporting the framework. European nations contributing to oversight discussions. International bodies discussing future governance. But here's what's truly striking about this list, and this connects directly to the fragility question we'll examine in discovery number 4. Every single one of these parties has different interests, different agendas, different definitions of success, and yet they're all part of the same framework. This isn't Israel and Gaza shaking hands across a table. This is Israel operating inside a global framework. Many voices, many guarantees, many stakeholders, many parties with interests, agendas, and influence. And here's what's prophetically significant. This kind of multilateral structure is exactly what makes deception effective. When one party lies, you might catch it. When many parties all agree on a narrative, questioning it becomes much harder. The covenant with many isn't just about numbers. It's about the appearance of consensus, the weight of international agreement, the sense that everyone agrees, so it must be legitimate. But here's what makes this even more ominous. Multilateral frameworks don't stay contained. They expand. They reach for more. Now let me show you something counterintuitive. Most people assume that prophetic covenants must be strong to be significant. But Daniel never said the covenant would be strong. Strength and conviction are not the same thing. A weak agreement that people believe in is far more dangerous than a strong agreement people doubt. Let's look at the reality of the Gaza ceasefire as of late 2025. Violations continue. Hundreds have been documented by both sides. Phase 2 of the agreement has stalled repeatedly. Hamas has rejected full disarmament, insisting on maintaining military capability. Accusations fly back and forth daily. The ceasefire holds, but barely. It's fragile, precarious, one major incident away from collapse. Most analysts would call this a failure in progress. But here's what they're missing, and this connects to a critical scripture we need to examine. The fragility doesn't disqualify this from prophetic relevance. Fragile agreements create the need for stronger agreements. Failed frameworks create the demand for better frameworks. Weakness today creates the opening for strength tomorrow. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, "For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." Notice what Paul says, when they shall say peace and safety. Not when peace and safety actually exist. When they say it, when they declare it, when they announce it, when they convince themselves and others that the danger is past. The deception isn't in achieving real peace. The deception is in believing peace exists when it doesn't. False peace doesn't need to be stable. It just needs to be convincing enough that people let their guard down. It needs to last long enough to reposition everything. But here's what's truly chilling about this verse, and this becomes absolutely critical when we reach the finale. Paul doesn't say, destruction comes when peace fails. He says destruction comes when people believe in the peace. The belief is the trigger, not the reality. And here's what should concern every prophecy student. The Gaza ceasefire has already accomplished that repositioning. Israel's posture has changed. Israel's focus has shifted. The board has been reset. Whether the ceasefire lasts another month or another year almost doesn't matter. The shift has already occurred. Because every prophetic road eventually leads to the same place. And that place is about to become very important. The Bible tells us exactly what to watch for: peace. The moment the world declares peace and safety is the moment believers should recognize what's actually coming. And almost no one is paying attention to this warning. Let me show you what Scripture actually says, and why it should change how you see every peace deal, every treaty, and every headline that promises a new era of security. There's a verse in the New Testament that should stop every believer in their tracks. It's not obscure, It's not hidden in some difficult passage. It's plain, direct, and terrifying in its clarity. And yet most Christians have never seriously considered what it means. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Let me break this down, because every single phrase matters. For when they shall say, this is describing a specific moment in time, not a vague era, not a general attitude, a moment when a declaration is made, when they, the world, the leaders, the nations, make an announcement. Peace and safety. These are the two words. This is the phrase. Not war is coming. Not prepare for hardship. Peace, safety. The two things every human being desires most. Security from enemies. Freedom from fear. But here's what's chilling. And this connects directly to why the Antichrist's method will deceive so many. This declaration isn't a lie in the moment it's spoken. They'll genuinely believe it. The treaties will be signed. The conflicts will pause. The headlines will celebrate. It will look real. And then, sudden destruction cometh upon them. Not gradual decline, not slow deterioration, not warning signs followed by measured response. Sudden destruction. The Greek word here is olethros, complete ruin, utter devastation. He says it comes as travail upon a woman with child. Have you ever seen a woman go into labor? It doesn't announce itself weeks in advance. There's no countdown clock. One moment, everything seems stable. The next moment, contractions. And once labor begins, there's no stopping it. No pausing. No renegotiating. The process has started, and it will reach its conclusion regardless of anyone's preferences. That's what Paul is describing. And once they begin, they shall not escape. No escape. No second chances. No opportunity to reconsider. But here's what makes Paul's warning even more terrifying. And this is something that will become absolutely crucial when we examine the historical pattern. This isn't the first time God's people have been deceived by false peace. It's happened before, again and again, and every single time, destruction followed. Scripture doesn't condemn peace. God is not against peace. In fact, God is called the God of peace multiple times in the New Testament. Jesus is called the Prince of Peace. The fruit of the Spirit includes peace. So when Paul warns about peace and safety declarations, he's not warning against peace itself. He's warning against a specific kind of peace, a counterfeit, a substitution that looks like the real thing but lacks its substance. And Scripture gives us clear markers to identify the difference. Let me show you what the prophet said, because this pattern has been repeating for thousands of years. Jeremiah 6:14. They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Look at what God is describing through Jeremiah. The leaders, the prophets, they're saying, peace, peace. They're making declarations. They're offering assurances. They're telling people everything is fine. But God says, there is no peace. How can both be true? How can leaders declare peace while God says there is none? Because they're using different definitions. The leaders were addressing symptoms. They were managing appearances. They were creating political stability and calling it peace. But underneath the surface, the people were still in rebellion against God. The sin that invited judgment was still present. The spiritual disease was untreated. They put a bandage on a tumor and called it healed. And Jeremiah repeats this warning. Look at chapter 8, verse 11. For they have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, Peace, peace, when there is no peace. Word for word, the same indictment. God wanted to make sure no one missed it. But here's what makes this even more relevant. Jeremiah wasn't the only prophet who saw this pattern. Ezekiel saw it too. And what Ezekiel adds will change how you see every peace deal in the news today. Ezekiel describes the same pattern with even more detail. Ezekiel 13:10. Even because they have seduced my people, saying, Peace. And there was no peace. And one built up a wall, and lo, others daubed it with untempered mortar. Seduced my people. That's the word God uses. Not informed, not encouraged, seduced, deceived, led astray through false assurance. But here's what's truly alarming about this word. Seduction implies attraction. It implies desire. The people wanted to believe the false peace. They chose the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. And that's exactly what will happen again on a global scale. And look at the metaphor. Building a wall with untempered mortar. They constructed something that looked like protection. It had the appearance of security. But the mortar was weak. The foundation was faulty. And when the storm came, the wall collapsed. That's what false peace is. It's a wall built with untempered mortar. It looks stable until pressure tests it. So what are the characteristics of this dangerous peace? Let me give you 5 markers. First, it's built without God. The peace Paul warns about is human achievement, diplomatic skill, economic arrangement, military balance. There's no acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, no submission to His will, no alignment with His purposes. But here's what makes this characteristic so damning. Peace without God isn't just incomplete. It's doomed. It has an expiration date written into its very foundation. When you see peace treaties that ignore the God of Israel, that pretend spiritual realities don't exist, that treat the Holy Land as just another piece of real estate to be negotiated, that's the kind of peace Scripture warns about. Second, it ignores sin and judgment. False peace never addresses the actual problem. Humanity's rebellion against God is the root cause of all conflict. Any peace that doesn't acknowledge human sinfulness and the need for redemption is temporary at best. It's treating symptoms while the disease progresses. Third, it's economic and political, not spiritual. This is crucial. The peace the world celebrates is measured in trade agreements, GDP growth, reduced military spending. These aren't bad things, but when they become substitutes for spiritual reality, when prosperity becomes the new God, then we've entered dangerous territory. Fourth, it creates false security. Remember Ezekiel's wall with untempered mortar? False peace makes people feel safe when they're actually vulnerable. It lulls them into complacency. It convinces them the danger has passed when the danger has only been postponed. But here's what's truly sobering about false security. And this connects directly to why Israel's condition before the Ezekiel 38 invasion matters so much. The more secure people feel, the less vigilant they become. And the less vigilant they become, the more vulnerable they actually are. Fifth, it silences prophetic warnings. When peace is declared, anyone who warns of coming judgment sounds crazy. They're dismissed as alarmist, pessimist, fearmonger. The prophets who speak truth become inconvenient voices that disrupt the celebration. But here's what's truly sobering about this characteristic. Silencing prophetic voices isn't just a side effect of false peace. It's a requirement. The deception can't work if people are being warned. The trap can't spring if someone keeps pointing at it. This happened in Jeremiah's day. This happened before every major catastrophe in history. And it will happen again before the destruction Paul describes. Discovery number 6. Why Jerusalem is always next. Here's something that most news analysts completely miss. They focus on Gaza. They focus on Lebanon. They focus on Iran. But they miss the prophetic center of gravity. Remember this because it ties everything together. Gaza is peripheral. Jerusalem is central. Every significant end-time prophecy converges on Jerusalem. Not Gaza, not Tel Aviv, not any other location. The periphery is where conflicts happen. The center is where prophecy culminates. Daniel 9 focuses on Jerusalem and the temple. Daniel 11 culminates in the glorious land. Matthew 24 describes the abomination standing in the holy place. Zechariah 12-14 describes all nations gathered against Jerusalem. Revelation 11 centers on Jerusalem during the tribulation. But here's what's truly striking about this convergence, and this connects to everything we examined about multinational frameworks in Discovery number 3. The nations don't just end up at Jerusalem by accident. They're drawn there. Frameworks pull them there. Agreements require involvement there. Zechariah 12:2-3. KJV. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. A cup of trembling, a burdensome stone, all nations gathered against it. This is Jerusalem's prophetic destiny. But here's what I need to make absolutely clear, and this is essential for maintaining credibility and biblical accuracy. What we're seeing is not the final covenant. Not yet. And understanding why it's not the final covenant is just as important as understanding why it matters. Let me be very direct about what the Gaza ceasefire is not. This is not Daniel 9:27 fulfilled. And here's why being clear about this matters. Because understanding what's missing helps us recognize what to watch for. The final covenant has specific characteristics that this agreement lacks. Here's what's missing. No 7-year duration. The ceasefire framework has no defined 7-year term. It's phased, uncertain, constantly renegotiated. But here's what's significant about this. Temporary frameworks often become permanent ones. Phases extend. Terms expand. What starts as months becomes years. No temple sacrifices. Daniel's covenant involves stopping sacrifices midway through. There are currently no temple sacrifices to stop. But here's what's striking, and this connects to the conditioning process we're about to examine. The Temple Institute has vessels prepared. The priesthood is being trained. The red heifer has been identified. The pieces are being positioned. No abomination of desolation. The midpoint betrayal that Jesus referenced in Matthew 24:15 has not occurred. But here's what's important to understand. And this becomes crucial when we examine deception in Discovery number 8. The abomination comes after the covenant is trusted. The betrayal requires first building confidence. No singular world ruler. There's no Antichrist figure confirming this deal. It's a multinational diplomatic effort with multiple leaders. But here's what's prophetically significant about this, and I need you to remember this. The infrastructure being built could easily be handed to a single leader. The framework exists. It just needs someone to take control of it. So why does any of this matter if it's not the fulfillment? Because every prophetic fulfillment has precursors. Rehearsals come before performances. Shadows come before substance. Patterns emerge before culmination. This rehearsal is conditioning the world to accept something unprecedented. What we're seeing is conditioning. The world is being conditioned to accept multinational frameworks over Israel's security. Israel is being conditioned to accept international oversight and involvement. The international community is being conditioned to insert itself into Israel's affairs. The mechanisms are being established. The precedents are being set. The template is being created. But here's what's truly sobering about this conditioning process. Conditioning works best when people don't realize it's happening. When the real covenant comes, the one Daniel described, the one that launches the tribulation, it won't seem strange. It won't seem unprecedented. It will seem like the obvious next step, because the world will have already accepted the pattern. So why don't most people recognize what's happening? Why isn't this on every news channel? Why aren't more voices raising concern? And here's what makes this question so important. Because the answer reveals something crucial about how deception actually works. People expect prophecy to feel dramatic. They expect thunder and lightning. They expect obvious villains and clear turning points. They expect prophecy to announce itself. But prophecy rarely works that way. Prophecy often advances through paperwork, through negotiations, through frameworks and agreements, through diplomatic language that puts people to sleep. Peace deals don't generate clicks. Multinational oversight mechanisms don't go viral. Governance frameworks don't trend on social media. People scroll right past. And that's precisely what makes these moments dangerous. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. Jesus' first warning about the end times wasn't about war. It wasn't about earthquakes. It wasn't about famine. It was about deception. Take heed that no man deceive you. Be careful. Pay attention. Don't be fooled. But here's what most people miss about this warning. And remember this when we examine what to watch for in Discovery number 9. Jesus doesn't say, Take heed that no one attack you. He says, Take heed that no one deceive you. The danger isn't the obvious threat. The danger is the hidden one. The one that doesn't look like danger at all. Deception doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. It comes dressed in reasonable language, backed by international consensus, endorsed by trusted institutions. It feels safe. It feels boring. It feels like progress. But here's what makes this kind of deception so effective. And this ties directly back to everything we've examined about multinational frameworks. When everyone agrees, questioning becomes social suicide. When institutions endorse, skepticism seems paranoid. When the world exhales in relief, watchfulness seems excessive. Luke 21:34-35. KJV, and take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, and drunkenness, and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. As a snare, a trap, something that catches you by surprise, not because it was hidden, but because you weren't paying attention. The snare catches people who are distracted, overcharged with the cares of life, looking elsewhere. The problem isn't that the trap is invisible. The problem is that people aren't looking. The most dangerous prophetic moments don't feel dangerous. They feel like relief. They feel like, finally, things are calming down. And while everyone relaxes, the trap tightens. That's why this shift matters. Not because it's the fulfillment, because it's the setup. And setups are designed to go unnoticed. So what should we be watching for? What signs indicate we're moving closer to Daniel's prophecy? Let me give you specific markers, not dates, but developments to monitor. And here's why these specific markers matter. Each one connects directly back to the patterns we've already examined. Watch for duration extensions, when temporary becomes semi-permanent, when ceasefire becomes peace agreement, when short-term becomes long-term. Each extension normalizes the arrangement and deepens the precedent. Remember what we discussed in Discovery number 7 about conditioning. This is exactly how conditioning works. What starts as exceptional becomes normal. What starts as emergency becomes permanent. Watch for broader normalization, especially Saudi Arabia. If the largest Sunni power normalizes relations with Israel as part of this framework, the covenant with many expands dramatically. The Abraham Accords were a beginning. Watch for acceleration. Remember what we examined in Discovery number 3. The many keeps growing. Each new participant adds weight. Each new party adds legitimacy. Watch for international security guarantees, peacekeeping forces, multinational troops, foreign soldiers on Israeli soil or borders. Each step normalizes outside authority over Israeli security. Remember the multinational framework we discussed? This is how it expands. Not through conquest, but through invitation. Not through force, but through agreement. Watch for Jerusalem-related concessions, Temple Mount arrangements, access agreements, holy site negotiations, international involvement in Jerusalem's status. This is where the prophetic center lies. Remember what we examined in Discovery number 6. Every framework eventually reaches for Jerusalem. Watch for the reaching. Watch for language changes. When temporary becomes permanent. When framework becomes covenant. When arrangement becomes guarantee. When leaders start using words like lasting peace and final status, pay very close attention. Remember what we examined about the difference between strength and conviction. The language reveals what people believe. And what people believe matters more than what actually exists. The building process doesn't pause while you decide whether to pay attention. It continues. And every day it continues. The final structure gets closer to completion. Finale. The silence is the signal. Let me bring everything together. Something shifted in Israel. Not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. Not through military victory, but through diplomatic framework. Not with explosions, but with agreements. And here's what makes this shift so significant. Everything we've examined points to the same conclusion. International oversight normalized. For the first time in years, Israel accepted multinational involvement in its southern security. That's a precedent that didn't exist before. Remember what we examined in Discovery number 3. The covenant with many requires exactly this kind of multinational framework. The infrastructure is being built. Israel gained breathing room. The southern front is quiet enough that attention can shift. That redirection is strategically significant. Remember what we examined in Discovery number 5. Daniel 11 shows the south calming before the north escalates. The pattern is forming. The prophetic board repositioned. Southern threats diminished. Northern focus increased. Jerusalem frameworks advanced. Remember what we examined in Discovery number 6. Every prophetic road leads to Jerusalem. The path is being cleared. None of this means the tribulation starts tomorrow. None of this means we can set dates or make definitive claims. But all of this means the conditions Daniel described are becoming plausible in ways they weren't before. The pieces are moving into position. The patterns are emerging. The templates are being established.